Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to speak on Bill C-391, an act respecting a national strategy for the repatriation of Aboriginal cultural property. While this bill has very good intentions, Mr. Speaker, there are aspects which could lead to unforeseen consequences and which are consequently in need of some amendments. In fact, many amendments. First Nation communities, as we all know, play a critical role throughout this great country, contributing to our great cultural diversity and to our history. The cultural artifacts of First Nation peoples provide all Canadians with opportunities to learn lessons from the past and understand the present and view over the future with greater awareness and clarity. In order, though, to ensure that cultural artifacts of First Nations continue to educate, continue to inform, and inspire Canadians across this country, significant dialogue took place way back in 1994 between the Canadian Museums Association and the Assembly of First Nations with the goal, Mr. Speaker, of ensuring that the common interest of Canadians is met by these important cultural artifacts. They developed a joint recommendation through many consultations which advocated for moral and ethical frameworks for the display and interpretation of First Nation cultural artifacts and for resolving disputes. The report between the Canadian Museum Association and the Assembly of First Nations found that within museums' collections, the importance of cultural objects is recognized. These objects represent cultural history and values and are therefore sources of learning, pride, and self-esteem. The primary, though, concern of First Peoples is with the importance of cultural collections within their own communities. Nonetheless, there is a general recognition that these collections and that the institutions can care for them serve a wider function and can contribute to a greater public education and awareness of the significant cultural contributions made by First Peoples in this country. Clearly, we all want to ensure that as many Canadians as possible are able to learn about First Nation cultures and discover that from these artifacts, the rich cultural heritage of First Nation people. It is in the common interest of all Canadians that we continue to educate and inform about the amazing contributions which have been made by First Nations people throughout history, right up to the present day. Disconcertingly, though, the Canadian Museums Association was not consulted prior to the introduction of this bill, and that is troubling. This is unfortunate, considering that the vast body of work which has been done by this marvelous organization, along with numerous First Nations in the field of First Nations cultural artifacts and how best to promote mutual interests. One of the principles brought forward by this joint recommendation of Canadian Museums Association and the Assembly of First Nations is that museums and First Peoples will work together to correct the inequities that have been characterized in the relationship in the past. In particular, Mr. Speaker, the desire and the authority of First Peoples to speak for themselves should definitely be recognized and affirmed by museums. However, given that the Canadian Museums Association was not consulted prior to the introduction of this bill, the partnership highlighted by this principle from the joint recommendation seems to have been forgotten during the drafting of this bill. And that's unfortunate. We go back to 1994, the AFN and the Canadian Museums Association, talking about artifacts that we're discussing today in 2018. In recognition that the presentation and interpretation of First Nations cultural artifacts represents a significant public good for this country in terms of wealth of knowledge, in terms of perspective and understanding that it provides Canadians across this country, and in keeping with the recommendations resulted from the excellent work done by the Canadian Museums Association and the AFN, we will propose an amendment which will ensure the consideration be given to the public interest in artifacts being available to Canadians in a way that enhances knowledge and appreciation of Aboriginal culture. Our cultural diversity can only further be improved through the understanding which Canadians acquire as a result of the learning which comes from these cultural artifacts. Secondly, we will propose, Mr. Speaker, that steps be taken to ensure that First Nations cultural artifacts are preserved in such a way that they will be available to instruct and inspire all future generations of Canadians who will only benefit from the continued of this cultural property and heritage. Our amendment will seek to ensure that consideration is given to how best to adequately preserve and protect the quality and integrity of Aboriginal cultural property. No common interest is served when cultural artifacts are damaged or even destroyed, and we should be taking every precaution possible to ensure that these cultural artifacts survive for the benefit of all Canadians. Such a consideration is currently absent within this bill, C-391, and in its present state, so we believe that this amendment will better serve the intentions of the bill by removing unforeseen consequences. Additionally, we note that some trepidation that this bill includes a very broad definition of Aboriginal cultural property. This is defined in the bill as objects of historical, social, ceremonial, or cultural importance to the Aboriginal peoples of Canada. One outcome that we want to avoid, Mr. Speaker, in this bill is a chill effect on the thriving First Nations art sector, in which our First Nations artisans and our craftspeople produce many stunning works which are bought by people around the world. The income which these artists generate through this sector is very, very important for many families. I saw it firsthand when I had an opportunity in January to go to Nunavut. When the plane lands in a community, the artists come out really, really thrilled to show off their work to those new to the community. This work we definitely want to protect. We want to make sure that people are not discouraged from purchasing the works of art produced by these talented First Nation artisans for fear that this work may be repatriated in the future. That is why we will propose an amendment that will ensure that such a strategy does not have the effect of harming or discouraging the importance of commercial trade by Aboriginal artists in the creation and sale of art, design, and fashion. Finally, as my colleague from York Simcoe noted, we will propose an amendment which will ensure that the proposed repatriation policy only affects artifacts that individuals or museums are no longer interested in possessing. This is in the spirit of remarks made by the Honourable Member for Cumberland-Colchester across the aisle, who said the intent is not to force anyone to give up any artifacts. It also opens the door, Mr. Speaker, I believe, if there is an artifact in storage or even not on display, this will encourage owners to have them on display either at their own facility or even lend them out to other facilities across this great nation. First Nations culture is incredibly important for Canada. It serves to broaden the perspectives, the knowledge, the understanding for all Canadians. We need to make sure that we are doing everything to ensure that First Nations cultural artifacts continue to teach, continue to inspire all of us, both now and in the generations to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.